Chapter 28, The Painting from JE2US-A Novel. A cavernous warehouse had been staged for tonight's event. Metal folding chairs had been aligned with precision and draped with crimson fabric. A 30-foot wide rostrum had been constructed and carpeted. A stained glass podium, inset with rubies and other jewels, sat just off-center, a gavel laying sideways across it, ready to call the proceedings to order. A subtle beam of light coming from somewhere aloft landed squarely on the easel that held the painting, the centerpiece of today's auction. The easel was elegantly constructed of two silver beams, one vertical, one horizontal. The painting, rimmed with a narrow gold frame, rested proudly on the easel, shrouded in red velvet. To the left of the painting was a bronze altar, complete with gas burners and propane at the ready. There was generally some sort of sacrifice offered at these high-level proceedings, and it appeared today would be no exception. 1,000 candles were burning, completely encircling the chairs and the platform. 1,000 lumens, which normally would have created a warm, inviting atmosphere, gave the room a sinister aroma of anticipation. Sebastian had orchestrated this event down to the smallest detail. 500 of the hierarchy of the ineffable Baal had been invited. These were the most wealthy, the most powerful, the present and future of the faith. Sebastian had decided to make a statement with today's multi-act drama. This would be his greatest moment, an event with theatrics that would keep the priests talking for decades. He also intended to fully massacre the reputation of Jesus. Sebastian's hatred for this supposed Messiah had become all-consuming, and he had managed to spread that disease throughout the upper ranks of Baal. At 7 p.m., the guests began arriving. Private planes were littering the hangars of Humphrey Terminal. The top floors of hotels were spoken for. Stretch limos paraded through the city streets and finally unfurled their passengers on the red carpet in starched religious garb. It was a night to be draped in flowing black robes. Attendees weren't asked who they were wearing, but there were enough pleats, tucks, and miles of fabric that designers must have been busy for weeks. Celebrities, who made up a sizable nucleus of the Baal elite, were especially sought after by tonight's media. By the way, the media was welcomed for the red carpet, but was rigidly and militarily prevented from witnessing anything inside the warehouse. The security was vault-like. The code of silence was a core tenet of Baal, and if broken, elicited severe consequences, excommunication or worse. Our tribe knew about tonight's event. Jesus had warned us that it was going to be a difficult day, but we didn't really know what he meant by that. Maddie and I had managed to sneak in through a side door earlier in the day and stayed in the shadows. I wasn't sure if others from our group had made it inside or not. Sebastian pounded the gavel 3 times with a 5-second gap between them. By the time the third rap landed, the audience was already seated and silent. The gavel blows echoed throughout the warehouse. A collection of musicians holding long, straight trumpets with Baal banners flowing down from them stood and played a short fanfare. As the last note resonated, the delegation rose to its feet on cue, lifted their hands in the air, and together recited, Baal, plurimus sanctus, existo laus. Baal, most holy, be praised. Then they crossed their arms and bowed deeply. Nos cultus vos, said Sebastian. The crowd took their seats. He looked out across the faces of the powerful quorum and felt emboldened with his own authority. We are gathered here tonight to witness the rise and possibly the fall of a unique artist, a truly gifted artist, but one who may be severely misguided in his understanding of l'art véritable. Oh, you will see a painting as has never been seen before in history, a painting that virtually speaks from the canvas, audibly whispering coups and threats, a painting that may truly hold inestimable worth. The crowd whispered with curiosity. But I may be giving too much away too early. Let me tell the story. He walked over to the painting, still draped in red velvet. History has given us great artists. Some have been religious, some agnostic, some repugnant, and some virtually divine. Works of art are generally not judged by the character of its creator, but judged on its own inherent creative merit. However, there is a line that when crossed, true connoisseurs can no longer look on a piece of art because it harbors perilous power, innate and unfathomable. This power can either be for good or ill, but when such power has been painted through the chords of the canvas, it becomes supremely dangerous. So dangerous, I contend, that it can alter culture, society, humanity. It can alter faith, including faith in the ineffable Baal. There was a great deal of mumbling, questions spoken and unspoken. Sebastian continued, raising his voice with passion. When a piece of art is embodied with this kind of power, it only leaves us with two choices. One, we either need to worship it, or two, we need to destroy it. It is either supremely worthy or supremely fatal. I have not yet determined from which camp to judge tonight's artist and his work. His right hand gathered a few folds of the red shroud over the painting, and he bellowed, "Shall we bow our knee?" He snatched the red cloth from the painting. "Or shall we sacrifice it on the altar?" He wheeled and threw his index finger at the bronze altar. It erupted into flames on cue, hurtling 10 feet into the air, heightening the cryptic nature of the evening. The light from the flames licked at the painting in a most eerie way, casting shadows on the brushstrokes of Maddie's face. Her eyes seemed to glow in the firelight, piercing even more deeply through the darkness than they had in daylight. Those sitting closest to the painting shielded their eyes not from the fire, but from the painting. That is why I have invited you, my most distinguished guests. Tonight I ask you to bear witness and assist me in making this judgment. The trumpets unexpectedly landed another fanfare, startling the crowd back into their seats. Sebastian was thoroughly enjoying this drama. This crowd, many of the most powerful people in the country, from Wall Street to Hollywood to the halls of Congress, were on the edge of their seats, many ill at ease by the mysterious nature of the Lord Most High and his theatrics. And now, Sebastian rallied for Act 2. To assist us in making our verdict, I have collared a very special guest. Please rise. The delegates rose to their feet as he gestured toward the shadowed, empty space behind the platform. There was the rustle of 500 black robes as the delegates shifted left, then right, trying to see through the darkness. I heard a distant growl, muffled footsteps. Gradually, the light illuminated a woman in a bright red, formal evening gown walking toward us through a veil of darkness. Her heels clicked a rhythm on the concrete. Her lips glowed crimson, almost neon, as she came toward the light. As the candles and the fire from the altar added texture and contour to the approaching woman, I could see she had 2 leashes made of gold, one in each hand. One leash was attached to a dog, a Doberman, Sebastian's Marduk. The other was attached to a collar around a man's neck. Both collars gave off glints of light as their ruby studs captured the firelight. The man was shirtless, wearing only jeans, barefoot. A red velvet hood was pulled over his head. His wrists were chained together. He walked a bit sluggishly, as if in pain. When he got closer, I could see welts on his chest and back from a recent beating, blood trickling down his left arm. The woman struggled a bit as Marduk tugged at his leash. They walked up a ramp on the back of the stage till they were standing beside Sebastian. She spoke. "Lord Most High, I present to you good and evil." She handed the leashes to Sebastian, then faded back into the dark. Sebastian stood between them, lifted his arms high into the air, then dropped both leashes to the floor. Neither the man nor the dog moved. The ringmaster began to slowly walk in circles around each creature, running a finger across the man's chest as he circled. It's an interesting proposition, isn't it? A man, a dog. Good, evil. But which is which? As he passed Marduk, the dog licked his hand. Is a higher form of intelligence presumed to be good? He put his hand on the man's shoulder. Or does simple, ignorant devotion speak of a higher goodness? The dog cocked his head a bit. A man won't bite, but a dog will. As he said it, he bent over and slapped the man's leg as a command, and Marduk lunged at the man's leg and bit deeply into it with teeth bared. We heard a muffled groan as the man buckled temporarily from the pain. Sebastian waved Marduk off, blood dripping from its mouth. And, continued Sebastian, a dog cannot paint a picture. He ripped the hood off Jesus' head, and Sebastian shouted, "Or can he? Gentlemen, I give you the artist of this painting, Jesus, the Messiah." Tentative applause broke from the majority of the crowd. The theater had been a tad brutal for their taste, but these priests had very little love for Jesus. He had critiqued them in the media, chewed them up one side and down the other. Maybe this is what he deserved. This Messiah, continued the master of ceremonies, claims to be God's son, claims to have all power, claims to know what is right and wrong for every person on the planet, claims to love us while degenerate in our faith. Tell me, is that good or evil? Evil, shouted the most bold of the delegation. He claims he has the right to walk into temples and destroy our places of worship. Tell me, is that good or evil? Evil, another 100 joined in. He claims to have the power. He has the power and right to set all slaves free, that his laws supersede the laws of our land. Tell me, is that good or evil? Evil, shouted the whole delegation. He even claimed to love me while crucifying me with his words and telling me I was the father of lies, the seed of hatred, the scourge of humanity. Tell me, is that good or evil? Evil, evil, evil. He gave me this painting, but it was not a gift. It was a sentence, his way of condemning me, judging me, assigning to me, the Lord Most High, his guilt. I saw some spit hanging on Sebastian's lower lip. His anger was reaching full lather. You, Jesus, are in no position to judge. I, Sebastian Damien Gontrafo, the Lord Most High of the ineffable Baal, along with my 500 priests, are in complete control. We are now your judge and jury. We hold your fate in our hands. He looked out at the black-robed jury sequestered in the warehouse and said, "Give me your verdict, holy priests, innocent or guilty?" A unison chorus of "guilty" echoed through the warehouse like thunder. Maddie and I shivered in our dark corner. I could see a tear running down her cheek. I would have joined her, but I was too afraid to cry. Sebastian gathered himself and began slowly pacing in a circle around Jesus. As if in deep contemplation, he said, "What should we do? What should we do? He walked up to Jesus, got in his face, and said, "What do you have to say for yourself, Messiah? What sentence do you wish?" Jesus never moved, never spoke. Sebastian slapped him across the face, hard. "Speak!" he screamed. Still no reaction. He jerked on the leash, tossing Jesus' head back and forth, then forcibly swung him in a circle at the end of his tether. "I know you have powers. I've seen them. I don't know where your powers come from, but I suspect it's someplace very dark." With his face just inches from Jesus, he shouted, "Show me your power, mighty Messiah." The priest waited and watched. Still nothing. Sebastian punched Jesus in the stomach. The air left his lungs with a hissing sound. Dignity and decorum, which Sebastian valued so highly, were rapidly vanishing from his being. He screamed, "If you're real, then I'm not. Either you are the truth or I am. If you are the true Messiah, the one true God, then you have the power to stop me. Kill me now, Jesus. I will gladly die at your hands." He was going off script, but he couldn't help himself. This Jesus incensed him. It had become an either-or proposition now. One of them had to have all the power and the other none. Sebastian wasn't willing to share so much as a fleck of lordship with this Messiah. Screaming and sweating, he took Jesus' hand and placed them on his own throat and yelled, "Kill me now, Jesus, kill me now." I shivered in my corner. I exhaled and could see my breath. The room had grown cold. My skin crawled, rippled with goosebumps. I silently whispered, "Kill him, Jesus, kill him." But Jesus slowly dropped his hands to his side, his head to the floor. Sebastian went crazy. "You divine fraud!" He grabbed Jesus with the strength of hatred, picked him up, and threw him into the flaming altar while screaming, "Die, Son of God, die!" I felt Maddie's fingernails cut through the skin on my arm. The priest began humming a sustained note, a rehearsed soundtrack to death as they watched Jesus in the fire. They raised their arms as they sang, but the song faded quickly into deathly silence. Silence except for the sound of the propane torches. Slowly, deliberately, Jesus stood up on the altar in the middle of the flames. He wasn't burning. He wasn't dying. The flames seemed to be having no effect on him. Sebastian stumbled backwards in fear. The delegation of priests gasped at what they were witnessing. Hope swelled for Maddie and me. Maybe this was it. Maybe Jesus was just teaching them all a lesson that he couldn't be touched. He had the power. He was the power. Jesus stepped down from the altar, unsinged. He looked Sebastian square in the face and calmly said, "You can do nothing except that which I grant you the power to do." Sebastian cowered from him, mumbling to himself. Then thinking maybe the fire wasn't real, he picked up Marduk and threw his dog into the fire. There were loud yelps for about 10 seconds, and then it was silent, except for the crackling sound and the smell of burning flesh. Sebastian paced the stage, wiping foam from his chin. Jesus bowed his head and went back to his passive stance. He made no attempts to run, to struggle, to fight back. He seemed resigned to the fact that this was happening to him. From the back corner of the warehouse, I wrestled with Jesus. I don't get him. He makes no sense. He has the power to save himself from fire, yet seems content to remain in chains. He stands silently while 1,000 lies are nailed to him. He lets a maniac like Sebastian abuse him when I know he has the power to speak that crazed lunatic into a pile of ash. This is not how I imagine things playing out. This is not how it's supposed to go. Just then, Maddie jumped up from beside me and ran into the light, down the aisle, onto the stage, and wrapped her arms around Jesus. her tears flowing freely as she hung on him. It took everything in me to keep from yelling or following her. This was a terrible move on her part. Suicidal. What should I do? Sebastian, attempting to pull himself together, walked up to her and said, "Who are you and who let you in? You realize now that you have seen this, you will have to..." His words skidded to a stop abruptly. He seemed to shiver under his robe, his eyes wide as he stared at Maddie. He had been living with that face on his wall for months. He knew it, and what was worse, it knew him. He took Maddie's chin in his hand and leaned in, closely dissecting her features. He squinted, analyzing her chin, her mouth, her eyes. He quickly looked away. Then he dragged her over in front of the painting, spun her around to face the delegation. He grabbed a handful of her hair and said, "This is the subject, the sorceress in the painting." The crowd exhaled, but their curiosity grew. There was much to be uncomfortable with in the evening, but this was truly great drama of the highest order. Through Baal rituals, the delegates had almost developed an appetite for the extreme, the macabre. This was ritual d'art. Sebastian's confidence seemed to be growing again. As he walked around the girl, his eyes fell on her hand, her number. His eyebrows raised, a smile wormed onto his lips. He took her hand and gently turned it toward the audience. My, what have we here? Jesus' little slave girl? Does he own you, my darling? What does he make you do? Or should I ask, what do you do for him? His questions filled with insinuation. He doesn't own me. He loves me. He saved me, she shot back boldly. Maddie, please keep your mouth shut, I thought. Saved you? Sebastian wrinkled his face as if trying to figure out what she meant by that. Saved you from what? Saved you for this? He spread his arms to encompass the theatrical tragedy. Sebastian looked over toward the altar and saw Marduk's leash and collar hanging from the edge of the bronze altar. He walked over, pulled the leash from the edge of the fire, burning his own hands. Then he snapped it around Maddie's neck. She let out a scream as the residual heat singed her neck. I stood and took 2 steps toward the stage, but that was all. I turned back, ashamed of my cowardice. From a place deep within, Jesus spoke. Leave her alone. Sebastian spun around, surprised to hear this voice again. He speaks. Sebastian shot back mockingly. Now he speaks. The high priest pulled Maddie across the stage to Jesus. Again, he grabbed Maddie's hair and pushed her face into that of Jesus. You gave me the painting, Jesus. Does that mean you have given me her as well? Seems only fitting. He tugged on the leash, knocking Maddie to her knees, then walked her around the stage like a dog, kicking her back down when she tried to stand. Again, Jesus went silent. Now I had tears in my eyes. I knew I was helpless. I had the sense that this was not my fight, nor Maddie's. Jesus was going to do what he was going to do, and I would have to be okay with that. A great sadness came over me. I felt like I was watching the drama of human existence, the birth and depths of evil, the horrible capacity we have to hurt and hate. But why does evil have to win? Why, Jesus? Sebastian had been thinking for a bit. Now he addressed the delegation. Great priests of the ineffable Baal, you have seen the evidence. You have rendered your verdict. All that is left is the sentencing. He marched a circle around Jesus, Maddie still in tow. I was saddened to discover tonight that evil does not burn. It is imbued with its own power, and this Son of the Holy God has harnessed some of that power. Now he walked up to Jesus, and again a smile crawled onto his face. But I do understand one thing about you, Jesus. I can hurt you through others. I can destroy the things you love. Sebastian walked over to the painting, hauling Jesus and Maddie with him. He put Jesus to the right of the painting, then yanked Maddie to her feet and stood her to the left. Facing the delegation, he began a monologue he had labored over. Sebastian was back on script. It was Act 4, the conclusion of his drama, his cinema verite, his masterpiece, verite. He paced the stage as if giving final arguments before a jury. An artist invests his very soul in his creations. They are his masterpieces, objects of great worth. He loves them dearly because they were caressed into existence, stroked into being the greatest of care, the tenderest of passion. He breathes himself into the canvas so that his very image will be born in his work. He slaves for his art, and if he is lucky, he will produce one piece in his lifetime, by accident or inspiration, that ends up as his signature piece. The artist then sits back and admires his work with pride. It is good. He knows it. Whether anyone else recognizes it or not, he is certain that he has reached his highest calling, his crowning achievement, his masterpiece. The artist hopes his work will be appreciated, loved as much as he loves it, that it will hang on the walls of history and bring beauty to generations, that we will see through the physical elements, the canvas, the paint, and detect life. Not the representation of life, but life itself. He paused to look at the painting. This is Jesus' masterpiece. This is his highest calling. This is his final statement. Sebastian gathered in a huge breath, and with all the force within him, he spit on the painting. Maddie suddenly turned her head and wiped something from her face. Sebastian turned back to the crowd. In the presence of these witnesses, I, the Lord Most High, deliver your sentence. He raised his arms. Jesus, Messiah, Son of God, you shall watch as I carefully, methodically destroy your masterpiece. He turned Jesus' head to face the painting. Then he took his nails and slowly scratched across the canvas, leaving gouges where his nails had traveled. Instantly, Maddie let out a scream. Sebastian swung his eyes to her and saw blood rippling from her left cheek. She had identical scratch marks across her face, tracing the exact lines as those on the painting. His eyes grew large. He spit on the painting again, but this time his eyes remained on Maddie. The wad hit her square in the face, and she wiped at it like it was acid. Jesus looked at Sebastian and simply said, "Please." Sebastian thought for a while. His wheels were turning, trying to assess this new reality. He asked, confused, with honest curiosity, "So, which is your creation, Jesus? The painting or the girl?" Jesus didn't answer. Sebastian looked at Jesus and said, "I'm sorry, Messiah. This is going to be more severe than I had imagined. But the sentence has been rendered. There is no grace, no pardon." He took a knife from a pocket in his robe. He made a clean slice through the canvas, severing a shock of Maddie's painted hair. She felt a tug, and the hair above her right ear fell to the ground. He walked around Maddie, analyzing the mirror results of his actions. He went back to the painting and placed his scalpel tenderly on her right cheek. She whimpered. Then he carved his initials slowly into the canvas. She let out a moan that almost killed me. When he finished, he admired his handiwork on the living masterpiece. The SDG caused rivulets of blood to trail down her cheek and drip from her chin. He put his knife away and again turned to address the delegates. "What confounds me," he began, "is why he chose a slave to be the subject of his masterpiece. A slave. He could have chosen anyone. A king, a president, a priest," he gestured to the crowd. Then he put his arms out and said, "He could have chosen me." Sebastian grabbed a felt-tip pen from the podium and scrawled a number on the back of his own hand. He pressed so hard that he drew blood. Then he thrust the back of his hand into Jesus' face and yelled, "If I were a slave, would you have painted me? If I were of no consequence, would you have honored me by making me your masterpiece? Would it have killed you to love me like that?" It sounded like he was weeping as he spoke. Sebastian seemed to be losing his grip on reality, his sanity. He took the felt-tip pen and in a rage, he inscribed Maddie's slave number diagonally across the painting in large black characters. He threw the marker at the painting and screamed, "Stop looking at me!" He shielded his eyes from the painting as if they were boring holes in his head. I looked at Maddie. She had her eyes clamped shut, as if barring the visuals could bar the reality. Again, to the painting, he shouted, "Do not look at me!" He backed away from the painting and exhaled what must have been pure hatred. He drew his knife again, and under his breath he growled, "Those eyes!" He ran at the painting and plunged his knife first into her left, then her right eye. I didn't look, but I knew what was happening. She screamed for a long time, drowning out the wails and sobs of many in the audience. Several priests tried to run for the back door, but security stopped them. When I looked back, Jesus was on his knees, vomiting on the floor. "Damn you, Jesus," I thought. "If this hurts you so deeply, why don't you do something? What is wrong with him?" At this point, I was struggling to understand if I loved him or hated him. Nothing made sense. Sebastian stuck his fingers through the 2 holes in the painting. He smiled and seemed to gain a sense of relief, callous to the fact that there was a living human being blinded by his actions. No longer would those eyes be terrorizing him. He retrieved a small derringer from underneath his robe and raised it to Jesus' head. He leaned into Jesus and said, "I wonder which hurt you more, a bullet in your head or one in hers." As he finished the question, he swung his arm toward the painting and from point-blank range blew a hole through the canvas. I screamed, "No!" But it was just residual to the gunshot echo. I saw Maddie's skull explode as she crumpled to the floor, dead. Her blood had splattered on Sebastian's face, now the visage of madness. Jesus sobbed, head in his hands. Again, Sebastian seemed to gather himself, as if he could retrieve his dignified alter ego at will, stuffing his demonically possessed persona under his robe. He spoke, facing the priest, calm once again. "I believe I owe you all an apology. I brought you here under the false pretense that we were going to have an auction for this painting. Please forgive me, gentlemen." He thought for a second, then said, "Maybe it's not too late. The masterpiece is in a bit of disrepair, but it may still hold some value to someone. So let's start the bidding at $1,000. Anyone? Just raise your hand." No one moved. The 300 delegates were terrified of Sebastian. "Perhaps I have overestimated the value. Let's begin with $100. Silence. Come now, people. You know this was quite a piece of work. Surely someone..." "I would like to purchase the painting." Jesus interrupted him. Sebastian wheeled to face him. He laughed. "You?" Jesus nodded. "What can you possibly have to offer that would be of interest to me? asked Sebastian. Jesus looked at the painting, Maddie's lifeless body, then back at Sebastian. I bid myself, my body, for the painting. Sebastian turned slowly on his heel. Yourself? How exactly would that work? Without answering him, Jesus stepped around in front of the painting with his wrists still chained. He dipped his fingers in his own blood that was running down his left arm, then reached toward the canvas and started painting. Sebastian, taken aback by this unexpected move, did nothing but watch as Jesus tenderly stroked his blood into the scratches that were left by Sebastian's nails. As he did this, the scratches seemed to disappear. His blood restored the flaws till they were made perfect. Her cheek, now precisely as he had originally painted it. He ran his fingers along the slit that had cut Maddie's hair above her right ear, and the gash closed up. It was as if the severed threads in the canvas found their corresponding partners and were reunited. Again, Jesus coated his fingers with his blood, and he placed his fingertips gently on the left cheek. Touching Sebastian's initials, he traced the S. It glistened with his blood, but then in a moment it faded and the S disappeared. Then the D and the G, gone, completely gone, as if they had never existed. Sebastian looked defeated. Even this one thing he had been able to accomplish, to hurt Jesus, was now being undone, one blood stroke at a time. I don't know if we had been so focused on the painting that we hadn't noticed, but there was another change taking place. It was a change in Jesus. He was looking more frail, more drawn. His skin was losing its color, hanging on his bones. He seemed unsteady on his feet. He was aging before our very eyes. Sebastian noticed too, but remained silent. It seemed the events were now predetermined. Sebastian had played to the end of his script, and now the action was being directed by some other power. If it were possible to get colder in the room, it did. I looked at Maddie, lying face down in her own pool of blood. Now, Jesus, I thought, is it now that you will make this all right? Jesus looked into the empty slits of his masterpiece, where Maddie's eyes had been. He dipped his fingers into the blood one last time. This time it almost appeared as if he was siphoning the last pint from his veins. He staggered, dropped to a knee, then struggled mightily back to his feet. He faintly whispered, "It is finished," and placed his hands into the slits on the canvas. He looked toward the heavens and let out an interminable breath that sounded halfway between a prayer and a curse. We watched his body get sucked through the holes where Maddie's eyes had been. He fell, descending into the painting, and it swallowed him. And then he was gone. Sebastian, who was already sitting on the floor, steadied himself with his hands. The delegation held their collective breath. We all looked at the painting. It was flawless, without blemish. The room was still. Then gradually, wisp by wisp, Jesus' final breath hit the back wall, turned, and came sweeping back through the warehouse. It picked up steam, becoming a hurricane, a tornado. Robes rustled, then tore. Priests fell to their knees as airborne chairs slammed and clanged against the brick wall. The podium pitched forward, shattering into the concrete. The breath made a final pass over the room and extinguished every candle, the last gust smothering the altar's flame. And just as quickly, again, it was silent. Priests huddled in fear. Hundreds of hearts pounded silently like gavels into pillows. It was black, cold and deathly still. From somewhere in the darkness came a voice. Forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. It was Bartholomew. He said it again, louder, shouting, throwing his words against the darkness. Forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. Then from the stage, a match was struck. A single match. It was touched to a wick and lifted in front of a face. It was Maddie. She was alive, and not only alive, but whole. No cuts, no scratches, no initials, and her eyes. They were her eyes again. The priests let out stunned breaths from their positions on the floor. Maddie stood, candle in front of her, and stepped around to face the painting. I saw her shoulders shake. She reached her hand out and touched the canvas. Then she set the candle on the crossbeam of the easel at the bottom of the painting and sunk to her knees, sobbing. As she kneeled, she opened our view to the painting. A gasp went up from the whole room. Sebastian choked on a constricted scream. The painting. It was Jesus. It was Jesus. There was saliva on the canvas, scratch marks on the left cheek. Sebastian's initials were carved into his right cheek. There was a bullet hole in his forehead. Red paint trailed down from his wounds to the bottom edge of the painting where it dripped from the gold frame. A pool of blood, not paint, was collecting on the floor beneath the canvas. Maddie's slave number was scrawled diagonally across the whole painting, her number across his face. Maddie again reached up with her right hand to touch the painting, but jerked back and let out a muffled scream. Her hand, the number on her hand was gone. Sebastian, who had been watching all this from his spot on the floor, put his hands up to shield himself from the painting. "No," he screamed. Those eyes, those eyes." He turned and ran, screaming like a madman out the back door of the warehouse. It should have been difficult to determine this in the low light, but Sebastian had noticed what we all saw now. All the damaged marks he had inflicted on the painting were there, except the eyes. They were unmarred, clear and bright. But it wasn't just that. They were the same eyes that were in Maddie's portrait, the same eyes that saw through Sebastian. They had been the eyes of Jesus all along. Now that Sebastian was gone, the priests hurriedly made their exit. Security had fled closely on Sebastian's coattails. The warehouse emptied in a minute, Baal priests fleeing from the collateral damage of their Lord Most High. I went and kneeled with Maddie below the painting. It had all seemed so real, our time with Jesus. I truly thought he would lead a revolution of change, that he was the beginning of a new era for all of us. Had those hopes just died? As Maddie and I walked toward the back door, we passed Brunel, the curator from Lieu d'Art. He walked straight to the painting. He placed the single candle on the floor beneath the painting and lifted the masterpiece from the evil that disappeared into the dark. The candle cast an eerie cross-beam shadow on the ceiling of the warehouse as we walked out into the night.